To start, my friends Brian and Adam are in the house today. They are going to be having a discussion with us. Their topic is going to be stoking the fire. And so we've already got heated up, so they're going to feed our souls. This is going to be exciting. Brian Delgado has been a career educator since 2001. He has spent the time working to provide transformational experiences for young people. In 2015, Brian co-founded Blue Dot Education with friends and colleagues. He has been designing learning experiences and coaching educators and creating progressive, liberatory learning spaces. Much of the framework for Brian's educational philosophy came in the field during his 20 years as a teacher and administrator in the high-tech, high network of schools. In his spare time, Brian enjoys time with his family and friends, in particular when that time is spent in nature. So he's a real dude. Thank you for being here with us today, Brian. And then we also have Adam. Adam has a passion for designing the educational experiences that is focused on exploration and creative learning communities. As a district leader, he works with schools in order to shape education and what is best for student outcomes. In the West Allis West Milwaukee School District is where he is. He has served as a teacher, a principal, and a district administrator. He's engaged students in design of their own learning. Adam's passion for PBL has led him to develop innovative curricula and approaches that foster critical thinking, collaboration, real-world connections, and developing crucial life skills that prepare students for future challenges. As they present to us today, if you have questions, continue to drop those questions in the chat, and when time's permitting, I'll have a Q&A after they finish their presentation. So we done got fired up, and now we're gonna stoke the fire for PBLs. Fellas, take it over, after I stop sharing my screen, of course.
Thank you for that, Tracy.
All right. Good morning. Yeah, I think it's always hard to follow Joe, but we're representing Wisconsin here really well today. Joe's a couple hours from where I am, just outside of Milwaukee. So we'll try and keep that energy going. I think I need to ditch this chair and stand up myself because if you've ever seen Joe speak before, he's amazing. So we appreciate his passion for the work, much like everybody that's in here. So.
Yeah, I just found myself doing this in the background to everything you were saying. So.
All right, awesome. So we are here in order to stoke the fire for PBL with Adam and Brian. So just a quick little piece for our flow here. We have about an hour today. We're going to introduce ourselves so you can kind of get that background after our brief little bios, and then talk about how we're going to engage our students and our staff through experience in activating that student voice. Look at how we can partner with members of our community in order to really bolster our PBL projects, making learning public, and then also have some Q&A at the end for us too. So we're gonna get right into it. So this is me, and thinking about what inspires me. You got a picture of my family there. I think about how not only for our kids being our future. I got 3 kiddos that are there. So I think about what that learning design looks like for them in order to impact their educational, their future. Because when they get excited about school, then they're bringing their best energy to the school environment. So when we're planning things with students that are at the center of our work, I talk to my 8th grader every day, tell her what I get to do. I get to, design ice cream flavors with students for local businesses, and work at the bee farm and that we have going on in our schools, and some stuff that we'll talk about later. Thinking about keeping them at the center and designing that learning experience around their passions, around teacher passions. And so that they bring that energy and they bring that smile and that joy to their learning every day is super important. So I got a little picture of a kayak there. I like to get out in the kayak and get into nature and just kind of find that center. In that lower left, I have this picture. I was trying to think of what inspires me. And I think in terms of not only just education as a field and as a career choice, this is a picture of a barbecue place in Texas. And I mean, I do enjoy barbecue, but also thinking about the community that this creates. So you have a bunch of open tables there, and if you barbecue or if you cook, you're putting some things on there for 10, 12 hours, and you're just sitting down and having conversations. It's about the relationships. It's about finding those assets. And every once in a while, you got to go check on the meat and everything, but it's built around community, and it's built around those people that you are making a difference for. And then on the right there, I just have a picture of a community. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you're using your community and as your assets, and how you're using community strengths in order to really build up your project. So I'll throw it over to you, Brian.
Cool. And I love photos, so I overfilled the slide with photos, but a little bit about me. I'm the co-founder and a learning designer for Blue Dot Education, which is a project-based learning consulting company out in San Diego. More and more, I think of my home as not just, even though San Diego is the center point, that whole Colorado River Basin was actually in Wisconsin a few weeks ago. It's kind of a home away from our home. But when I landed in Las Vegas and I saw those wide open vistas again, I was like, this is home, anywhere in the West, in that sort of southwestern region. So the photos at the top are all the important people in my life who inspire me. That's my mom and my son in the top left. My climbing partner, we like to get out and have silly adventures together and often get ourselves in trouble, but that builds a level of trust. And anybody who's done this work long enough knows that it's not about never getting into trouble. It's about who you're in trouble with and being able to trust those people. It's an important thing. My grandfather in the middle photo there on the top, he is, I have a mantra when I see his picture and when I say his name that I'm his dream, living out, because he's the person who crossed over and came to the country to the US. Then my partner Annie and my huge family who I have 11 siblings. That definitely has informed how I approach this work. When you grow up around 11 distinct people and then you get to know their 20 some odd children, you gain a level, I think, of understanding of people that really helps you in this. That middle row is some of the students I work with, whether it's out in nature, trying ridiculously hard climbing problems, or the middle picture, Gannon there, took a project idea that we did where we were doing some filming of underwater species, in the local bay. And he has run with it and created an Instagram page with thousands and thousands of followers. He started that as a freshman in my class, and now he's a senior crushing it on his own, which is good to see. And then that other picture is just a picture of students working together on a thing. And why I love it is that they're making their jewelry out of rocks, but the space of them just in that circle having the conversation, that's like a magical little location. And then the bottom, like projects that inspire me, there's that weather balloon project where I get to see the Earth. I like to launch a few of those a year with whoever wants to get into that, because I just think it's magical. Again, photography and making in nature. And then some people might notice there's a weird photo of a broccoli in a hot tub there. And I just need to name that I was making this slide deck earlier this week, and my partner's son, Silas, who's an 11th grader, is like, well, if you want, said something, I'll try to repeat it, something along the lines of, well, if you want your slides to be fire, you got to put a pic that goes hard in there. And I was like, whoa, dude, you got to slow down and translate that. And so then he's like, Google pics that go hard. And so I Googled that, and he's like, that broccoli in the hot tub is probably the best photo you can get on there. So in honor of Silas, and pics that go hard, I have a broccoli in a hot tub. So I wanted to start here because I think this, as this thing has spread, the project-based learning thing, I feel like when we're saying it, we're often hearing different things. So I think it's important to center us in the way that Adam and I, when we say projects, what we're talking about, and not to denigrate anybody else's definition. I just think it's important to have a common language and a common understanding. And like I said, I was in that bubble at High Tech High in 2001 when we were sitting around talking about, well, what is a project, trying to figure this thing out, and nobody really knew. And it's actually a learning tradition that is as old as we are, as old as humanity, because it is the way we I think teach and learn best. But what you can think when we're talking about projects and project-based learning, you can think of it as a learning unit with a launch and a connected series of experiences that build on one another. I think of them as iterations of that launch that build to a culminating opportunity for students to share their learning publicly. And it is learning by doing. There's some experiential thing that leads the learning. And I put the stars because there's the sub notes there, because I think it's important to name. A buddy of mine, a colleague, was at a conference the other week where, you know, the folks were teaching about project-based learning, but it was a series of applied worksheets. And that's not what we're talking about. That's not what I'm talking about when I say a project. It's not the culminating activity at the end of a learning unit. It's actually a series of activities that are built in. And it's not separate or disconnected. One of the things that I've had to really emphasize as a coach working with teachers is that the project isn't something you do separate from the content you want to cover. Lots of teachers think, okay, I do my standards unit, then my reading unit, then I'll fit in my project. But it really is something where the learning emerges out of the project, and oftentimes, as you develop your skill set in this, things emerge that you didn't even plan as a teacher. And I think, you know, Joe was mentioning that they started with the Genius Hour, and then this other thing came, and this other thing came. So that's in essence what we're talking about when we say PBL. And so some examples of what that might look like. And these are some of my favorite ones from like the past few months. The picture on the left is actually from West Allis, West Milwaukee, where Adam works. I work alongside them out there. And this is from a second grade classroom. And students designed art to go on a blank pair of shoes to tell the story of where our shoes will take us. It was a project at the beginning of the year meant to build community and connection for the student group. And then they did a fashion show at the end of it that I got to be there for, which was absolutely fantastic. One of the best exhibitions of learning I've seen. The students got to do the fashion show, and then they had a reflection time where students shared out the things they learned. And again, this idea of emergence, the teachers did some work with maps of West Allis so students could sort of see where shoes might take them in the town. And then students had the idea that they wanted to make a map of the important places and get it out in City Hall, and the teachers followed their lead on that. So that's one example of the type of work. That second picture is actually comes out of work in an after-school space with 4- and 5-year-olds, where the teachers will bring in just a bunch of artifacts from nature, seeds and twigs, and students will play with them as a first go, and then they'll begin making mandalas out of them. What I love about it is it's something you could do in 15 or 20 minutes, but in that, I see mathematics, I see biology, I see plant identification, I see so much opportunity for content, art creation from a very simple structure. The third one over is sort of bringing joy to my heart because it's a school in San Diego called Option Secondary. It's a teacher in his second year. They started this in October with the goal of like, we want to have a public exhibition. They'd never done that before. That book came out last week. It was an anthology written by 10th and 11th graders. And the students publicly presented, and watching the teacher watch his students, all of the nerves and the joy, it was everything. For me to be able to sit there and be like, oh, I got to play a little part in this, and watching this class sort of make this journey was super cool. And then the one on the right comes from an alternative ed school where they're making skateboards. So, you know, projects can run the gamut. They can be very sort of simple structures like the mandala. They can be a more complicated build like the skateboard engineering, where students are, you know, making and designing and then and building the skateboard, putting the art on it. But it's a series of iterable experiences that you can connect content to. And so in terms of choosing the project and thinking of what the experience might be, I put this on here so that when this gets sent out as a PDF, you all can sort of sort through this, because those links at the top, the high-tech high GSE, PBL design kit, the unboxed project cards, changing the subject, seed and spark, they're all free open resources to get inspiration on the type of projects that you might want to implement. And so I just wanted to have this on there so when we send it out. Obviously, Defined Learning is a fantastic place as well, with tons of resources on PBL and types of projects you might implement. But I've always found the best inspiration for myself when I was in the classroom and still working in after school space is opening it up to students. Like, what are they into? And how can my interests and passion intersect with what they want to do? And, that skateboard project is a perfect example. That was born from a student who loved to skate. He had a skateboard stolen. He was really sad. We started, we as in my colleagues and I had conversations with him and realized, oh, we could help him build one. That one skateboard has now become a project that I think has been implemented in about 8 or 9 schools. So you never know when you follow the student voice where it might take you. And then for me personally, I'm always thinking about how can I get outside? How can I have students being in nature? How can I have students sort of seeing that side of themselves? Because I have this like profound, important belief that the natural system, that's the night sky, the trees, the forests, they're everyone's birthright. And we need to do a better job in schools of getting students out into those spaces so that they realize their connection to them and the importance of stewarding those spaces and sort of generating a reciprocal relationship with them.
All right, thanks, Brian. Yeah, I totally agree on the teacher passion piece. When you integrate teacher passion and that student voice, and you see a teacher who is just stoked about building skateboards and bringing their own passions into the space, that teacher walks in with a smile on their face every day. We have teachers in our district who have designed projects around baking, around beekeeping, around fashion, around building, whether it's building a shed for the school outside to house some outdoor recreational materials, or building furniture, or building little lending libraries, or writing poetry books that are published on Amazon. When that teacher is bringing that passion to the classroom every day, they walk into that building every day with a smile on their face, and they're leaving every day with a smile on their face. And this work is hard. This work is not easy. This is, this is work that is deeply rooted in, in this hard work that is collaborative and building community in your classroom and things like that. So I appreciate those comments. So now that we have a project idea, and Brian threw out some great resources there, the implementation piece is obviously a huge factor for us. So when working with teachers who are new to PBL and are kind of trying some things and looking at the way that this looks like in their classroom, we approach this from a couple different ways in terms of what their learning community looks like in the 4 walls of their classroom. So when I teach one of our micro-credential classes on PBL design, Brian, like he said, he's worked with a number of teachers in our district over the course of the past 3 or 4 years. Is we look for dispositions of not only purposeful and intentional planning, but what do the dispositions look like for your kids in your classroom? So thinking about the idea that, and Brian had mentioned this a little bit, is the idea that the learning is authentic and it's intentional. He talked about the intentional planning and leaving that space and that opportunity for deep and rich content. And some of these pieces that are cross-curricular, we're the Mandala project, you're talking about the biology, you're talking about the math, you're talking about maybe the reflection, having students write. So where is that space for authentic learning and that intentional planning in your classroom? When designing projects, I think it's super important also to make sure that you are leaving space to plan and teach what you are looking for in the outcome of the project. So if you are wanting your students, and a big focus of your project is you want students to be able to collaborate and what that looks like effectively in a group, make sure that you are leaving space and intentionally planning what collaboration looks like for a 5-year-old. What does that look like for a senior? Because for some of our kiddos, this is going to be new to them. Sometimes just grouping kids up in, in 4 spaces because they're located next to each other in a class, we do still have to teach them those collaborative skills. And those are the skills that we want our kids leaving with when they cross the stage at graduation. So thinking about, where is that learning intentional? Is there where's the learning public is the second piece that we kind of look for. This idea that we share learning and student learning, not just between the student and the teacher, but maybe we start small and it's 3 or 4 other kids on a Friday. And we have some of our teachers that every Friday, what they do is they just do a little presentation of learning or a POL, and a kiddo grabs an artifact that they were super proud of working on that week. And they take 3 minutes just to present that to their group. And it might be something where if it's a group of 4 kids, it takes 12 minutes on a Friday to really end that weekend and launch them into having a great space and reflecting on what they did in their project that week. It could be something as small as that. It could be the classroom across the hall. It could be the school down the street. We're all very comfortable with Zoom right now. So why not, have kids from another elementary school in your district give kids feedback on their poetry, or feedback on their writing, or feedback on, their math project. So what could that look like? Bringing in your PTA, bringing in administrators. Maybe it's the building administrator, maybe it's your district administrator. I will tell you, anytime that I get an invitation to go and give feedback to kids and check out their POLs or presentations of learning, I usually try and make that the forefront piece on my schedule, because that's what's important. They're wanting that feedback. And maybe it's a community business partner. So that public learning is ultra important. The third piece there is, like, what does feedback look like in your classroom? And so what does that look like when students are presenting to each other? Are they using, we'll steal from Ron Berger, kind, specific, and helpful feedback? So what does that look like in order for the student to understand that they might do something one time, they're going to get feedback, and then they're going to iterate on that, they're going to reflect, and they're going to make improvements based on that feedback. I think one of my favorite pieces to do here in working kids with feedback is to keep something that's non-academic. So we've gotten pizza before, and we're all eating pizza together, and we're like, oh, let's give feedback to the chef of the pizza. Like, what if we wrote a letter to them, or what if we sent them an email, or what if we called them up on the phone and said, ooh, I really like how you had the cheese balanced across the pizza. Then for those first couple experiences aren't about a student work and them bringing their student artifact of learning. It's about something that's non-academic, getting them used to that process. And again, that intentional planning around teaching them what we want those outcomes of the project to be. So, really elevating some of those project pieces is this idea of community partners. So just some reflective questions as you're planning projects and as you're looking to kind of elevate those projects is, number one, Brian talked, again, about the content pieces, like what are our standards that we are looking for our students to demonstrate mastery of? This is really like the meat and potatoes of the project. Who could we integrate as a partner from our community? So looking at our community as assets. And like I said in the beginning, I'm a relational person. So I don't have a problem stopping by a local business. We're a little bit bigger than Joe with his 3 bars in the gas station. We go, but like I'll drive by a restaurant and stop and talk to the restaurant owner and say, hey, are you looking to partner with somebody? That we have our project-based learning high school has an active bee farm, and we found a local business who is looking for a honey supplier. So we're looking at trying to get this pathway of creating our own like honey line specifically for this restaurant. So it's not being afraid to have those conversations, and then figuring out what would that integration look like. So as you're bringing in your community partners, think about what they're looking for from you and what you're looking for from them, and what does that look like as a successful partnership. Maybe you call that out right away at the beginning of the project, and so you can get both of your perspectives out there and what that piece looks like. So also too, like, businesses, they want to partner with us. So we, we find that employees of these businesses tend to be really engaged with our kiddos. They're getting out of their like daily grind and they're helping us out. The businesses are really, they're working with their future workforce. We have a lot of businesses who are recruiting students right out of high school that are coming with these collaborative skills that are involved in a project-based learning environment. And they're coming with a high level of employability skills, and it's great PR for them. So it's a super important piece to connect to your community, to bring in families, and remember that it's a two-way street. So I think about as we work with project-based learning, I think about the typical careers exploration talk where, someone's coming in and they're saying like, oh, this is what I do during my daily work. This is, what I kind of function. Here's my schooling, things like that. But how could you partner with that business? Let's say if you're, if you're working with the zoo, instead of having a zookeeper just come in and say, oh, here's what a typical day looks like as a zookeeper, and then you're leaving it open as a Q&A. How could you work with your students in order to like design a space for a specific animal and get feedback from that expert? Lean on those people and use them as experts for your project to really amp that up.
Yeah, and Adam, I want to, before I jump into the importance of community partners and the importance to the work for me, I just want to jump back and say a quick thing about the implementation and how you do it. I think it's important to name that when you're seeing an outcome that is not something that you're hoping for, to remind ourselves as educators that we get what we designed for. A wise friend of mine once said that because we were having a conversation about some things happening in school that, kids of color not sort of being where we wanted them to, and summer school being filled up with students of color. And we had to admit that to ourselves. We're getting what we designed for. And so how do we look back at that and try things? And when you are, whether you're in the classroom space, whether you're an AP, a principal, a superintendent, if there are outcomes that are not what you're hoping for, it is about redesigning and sometimes creatively complying, because oftentimes some of the design is ripped from us. It is decided at the state level, it is decided above where we are. And so we have to creatively comply. And a lot of this work, I see PBL, project-based learning, as a way to liberate students and teachers in the class, because what it allows for is it allows for life to come into it and things to emerge that you didn't necessarily plan for. And hopefully some of those things are good and you can follow those leads. In terms of the community partner piece, I would not be sitting here today without community partners. And just speaking a little bit about some of the ones I've cultivated. My background was in engineering, but I spent a few years working in the pharmaceutical industry before I went into teaching. And then I was in this strange project-based learning school where I was asked to do really fancy projects, and I didn't have skill sets to do them. And it was only through reaching out and finding folks who were willing to help and willing to be part of the project, not just to be a guest speaker, but to be a community partner, where they would come in, where they would share expertise, where I could sit down with them and pick their brain. And it really started with the San Diego Astronomy Association. I would encourage you, if there are folks on here interested in any sort of astronomy program, find your local astronomy association. Or I'd encourage you to reach out to me, because this field is going remote super fast. The pandemic pushed astronomy into a remote space. And now all sorts of folks are able to get online even during the daytime and order up data from far away, from telescopes far away, and then analyze that data. So our goal at one point was to sort of create NASA at the high school level. So we cultivated partnerships with astronomy associations, with the Farsight, which is a rocketry association, with Scripps Institute, so we could do some studying in the ocean. Two of the projects that sort of shifted my career that I'm still, working on, even though I've stepped away from the classroom space. One of which was a was a researcher, soil scientist who was studying, and one of the first scientists to do this, to study how mycelium might affect desert ecosystems. Lots of studies had been done to this point around 2015, 16 on how mycelium interacts in sort of a more a climate with more precipitation, but not much had been done in desert ecosystems. So she needed help planting trees. And I was like, I can bring out lots of students and we can get trees in the ground. And so we have now gone 3 times to this site in Northern Arizona. We have connected with the Dene and worked alongside them to help do some restoration on their site. And we're set to go back again next fall to do another set of planting. And I think we put like over 2,000 trees in the ground, many of which didn't survive, but that was part of the experiment. That's actually I'm standing next to my buddy Adam Borick, and we're standing next to a tree that our group had planted 2 years prior. So that's a 2-year-old cottonwood near the Little Colorado River. The photo below that was an experiment with putting something in the local bay in San Diego, like an artificial reef made of ceramic, and seeing what grew on that, and then pulling those out of the water and looking at what were the invasive species, what were the local species. And again, I have no background in marine biology, but with friends from Scripps Institute, friends who know that field, and they're excited to get in and teach and learn alongside folks who are passing this knowledge on to the next generation. So it's something that as teachers, this can be difficult. It can be so intimidating because it's like, I don't know how to do this thing. But when you cultivate a community partner, it allows you then to maybe expand your skill set to learn alongside the students. And the students then see a flattening of the whole culture of the class where they're like, whoa, he's learning too, or she's learning too, whoever the teacher might be. And that creates engagement because they realize there's a whole lot of authenticity in that space.
All right. Thanks, Brian. I think, Brian highlighted some projects. I think that there is some awesome space for this. We're just highlighting a couple of projects that we've seen in the past few years. I mentioned in the upper right-hand corner here, we have our project-based learning high school. Docky PBL has a working bee farm. This came from passions from the teacher, and that passion spilled over into the classroom. So they're learning about the biology of, the bees. They're learning about the bacteria that you can find in the honey. All of that piece is integrated in there and purposeful around that beekeeping. But they also have a business. So they're also making products out of honey. So they're learning all about marketing. They're learning about profit margin. They're learning about market research and what products sell and what products don't. And so they've been able to use all of this applied learning from their bee business in order to make this successful. It's a semester-long class, but it started out as a small project. Couple here in the center too. So some of my favorites that I got to be a part of was we had some students. The project was called Scoop There It Is. So they partnered with a local custard stand in order to design the flavor of the day. So this custard stand was right around the corner from the school. So you can see a couple pictures there. So this was probably like 6 weeks, 6 to 8 week project. And the kids were doing research and development. So they were making their own ice cream. They had the launch just by going to see the process and learning about the ingredients. But again, that going back to that intentional design around the project, they were learning about decimals, and their math content was coming right through the project. Brian opened with this. It wasn't like, here's a series of worksheets around decimal notation and, being able to perform functions with decimals. It was integrated right into the profit margin per scoop. So if you're going to add peanuts, and there's roughly 2 cents worth of peanuts in every scoop, and there's 4 cents worth of chocolate fudge, and there's 2.5 cents worth of marshmallow fluff, all of that was, calculated. And they were calculating like, how much is a profit per gallon? How many gallons are you going to sell in a day? And presenting that to the business owner as part of their project pitch in order to get their flavor of the day. So I can happily say I don't think I've ever spent more money on ice cream than when they had the flavors of the day at the local custard stand. I was going there and just pre-ordering like gallons of ice cream and taking it out to the school. So it was a super exciting project. And two, again, that's community partners. We just kind of, as a business around the corner, we just kind of met with them and said, hey, this is what we're thinking. And they loved it because it was great for them. It was great for us and a great partnership. So, and kids love seeing those business partnerships too. So super exciting. This one, the lower right here. This is, again, like I said, I'm a relational person. I'll talk to anybody. So this is a local business owner in our area who happens to be a former student of mine. And he went to university for sound engineering. And so we were like, boom, there's a podcast expert right there. So we had kiddos that were in kindergarten and first grade that were designing their own podcast around narrative writing and telling stories within our community. So there's a lot of pieces that are around that in order for that learning to go live. So I think it's important to look at our, Brian, this is you, sorry.
Yeah. So we've talked about experiences and the project design. We've talked about community partners. And now we want to get into students publicly sharing their learning. And I think students and teachers at all levels so that the reflection happens. But I wanted to get this slide in because in the coaching work that I've done, so often the sharing of learning as a routine that's happening while the project is rolling doesn't happen enough. And then folks want to have some sort of exhibition or sharing of learning at the end, but the students just aren't there. They're not ready. And so having routines built in where you're pair sharing often, where students are writing reflections about what they did during the week, where they're sharing in small groups, where essentially that dialogue and discourse is happening often and ongoing in the class, leads to the point where it comes time for a student to present what they learned, it's just all there. They've iterated through it enough, they've learned how to do it, and then they're just able to get up and talk about it. And the beautiful thing about this is it's also it's a wonderful method of assessment through dialogue to allow students, to have conversations in this way. And so I want to name it because oftentimes we get lost in the fancy thing the student is holding up, as opposed to the thing they're saying and the story they're telling about that thing, because that's the important piece. That discourse is where the learning is happening. And so, again, these slides will be shared out as a PDF, and I wanted to make sure that distinction was made, that it is not the fancy thing. It is, in fact, the story students are telling, and that has to be built into project design for students to be ready to share in a way that's helpful.
I'll definitely reiterate that point where when we made kind of a leap for us was leaving that reflection time at the end of the project, because that was us as a space for teachers and for leaders to really glean what they were getting out of the project. So we might have spent all this time specifically designing instruction on, building collaboration and building communication skills. And then when we were listening to those reflections from kiddos, making sure that they're highlighting some of those pieces. So like Brian talked about, this idea of sharing out that learning. So making that learning public is ultra important, because it kind of creates this next level bar for kids. And like I said before, it can be small. It can be sharing with the classroom across the hall. It can be sharing with a school down the street. If you live in our city, we have schools that are 3 or 4 blocks from each other. So we're constantly bringing high school students down to the elementary school, or middle school students over to the high school, and building those partnerships within our own school community, which is incredibly important, because those kids are seeing themselves 5 years ago when they were, when they're a senior, they're seeing themselves 5 years ago as a 7th grader and saying, oh, I wish I had that opportunity. And I wish I wasn't nervous to talk about my learning like that. So a couple slides here. On the left, we did in our virtual school, we have a project-based learning virtual school in which they do a class around photojournalism. So the kids are using cameras, and they're going out and using pictures to tell stories. And so what we did was we partnered with a local restaurant in our community, and we had kind of like a gallery for the students. So we printed out their pictures. They stood by their picture boards. They were explaining their learning to the adults, and that was where the real learning happened. It wasn't necessarily about like what the aperture was and what the light, and the different styles of pictures that they were taking. It was every time we talked to these kiddos in the reflective process, the growth area for them was about how they could talk about their learning and the things that were important to them. So kids went and took pictures of schools that they used to attend, or they took pictures of, places, a house or an apartment where they used to live. And like Brian talked about before, the stories are so beautiful, and you really get to know your kids. It was like one of those unintended outcomes of like, yeah, we wanted to, teach narrative writing, and we wanted to have them tell stories through pictures. But then what we were learning about students throughout the process was amazing. And inviting community members, our mayor is amazing. He comes to everything that we invite him to, but inviting parents to be part of this space, inviting other community members, teachers, families, it really creates this atmosphere that is centered around student learning. And we did too, as one of our pieces I talked about before, feedback is ultra important, not only for the kids, but also for the adults. So in these spaces on the left and on the right, which I'll talk about here in a second, we had feedback that we had teachers, we had visitors all fill out. So the kids were getting feedback on their presentation and what they were talking about in their learning, much like how Joe was talking about earlier about a senior capstone portfolio. It's like when you get these kids who have been involved in project-based learning as an instructional design for 4 or 5 years, like they're able to communicate their needs as a learner. I was on the second version of the research and development panel for the Scoop There It Is project, and I remember a kiddo came up to me and said, "Hey, Mr. Hengel, I know that, like I'm in 4th grade now, and I know you've known me since I was a kindergarten when I did my podcast, but I need like real feedback. I don't want you to sugarcoat it. I need real feedback because I want my flavor to be chosen." So that was an amazing piece. This kid who has been involved in this high-level instructional design over the last 5 years is really really wants that feedback. On the right, this picture, we launched our school year this year of all of our schools in our district, each got a table and brought some students in to talk about learning that they were proud of from the previous year. And all of our 500 plus staff members all went around and listened to those students, and the passion that the students had for their work that they did last school year was amazing. And the way that teachers approached them and listened and gave them feedback and visited old students, like the energy level in that space to start off a year was amazing for us.
Yeah, I wanted to share a bit about how making learning public can look very different. It doesn't always have to center around students preparing a thing that they share. And the clearest example of this actually comes from some work we did out in Calexico, California with the Calexico Unified School District. And I got to shout out my friends out there, Karina Montaño, Fernando Arguelles, Jesus Huerta, Eduardo Perez, and Lucio Padilla, because they helped teach me this lesson. We've now done a series of astronomy nights where we come and set up telescopes. The first time was, the telescopes were there, people got in line, they came and looked. It's moved now. We've done it at 2 other schools with plans to do more, but it has grown. And to see it grow into like a learning event where astronomy plays a part, but there are stations set up where kids and families can be, drawing pictures of space, where there are VR headsets, where they're doing virtual tours of the space station, where they're making things on 3D printers, in an evening space where parents and grandparents and family members can be there was like a mind-blowing thing to watch. And to watch the crowd sizes go up. I think our last event had 600 people there. And it's a way that learning is made public, but not in the classic present style, but in like a shared space where everybody gets to be in the mix and be in conversation together about space, about the night sky, about a thing we're all experiencing. And so to like see that happen, and to see the way the community has really taken hold of it, and feeling like, oh, we got to come out and play a small role. But and then to me, it's all summed up in this photo on the left. We were handing the controller over, and it's a large telescope that was in on the moon, obviously, and it's projected onto a screen. And she was able to just do a tour around the moon, moving the telescope around. And the look on her face and the way that the kids in the background were screaming and lighting up, I was like, this is it. This is what we should be after in schools. Families there, kids of all ages. And so when you're thinking about, things that might move the needle in your space, getting creative with how you might make learning public in a unique way, how you might enlist a community partner like we were in this one. Be creative with it, go big, because pulling families in can have a huge impact.
Absolutely. Yeah, like I said, bringing that authentic audience. We've partnered with one of our local service agencies, and so we have kids who are just explaining their learning to outside audience members, and having some conversations, and just the way that the kids who have been involved in PBL as an instructional design for the past few years, the way that they speak about their learning is so powerful. And on the right, we got some middle school students that we walked over to one of the elementary school students as feedback partners. So again, really easy to have some kiddos walk over for 45 minutes and give feedback. Creates those strong community relationships, because these kiddos in the elementary school are going to that middle school next year. So they're working on those feedback pieces. So just great to build that community and center it around learning, much like Brian was just talking about.
And the final piece I'll say on making learning public is to maybe rethink assessment. What the image on the right is from a rocket project we did that was interdisciplinary. And we started the semester by giving students a blank piece of paper and asking them to write down everything they knew about rockets. We just wanted to know, like, and sort of thinking of it as initial formative assessment. And then every 3 weeks, because the project lasted the majority of the semester, every 3 weeks they would do the practice again. And about the third or fourth version of what we were calling mental maps, they started putting art on them. And the openness of this as an assessment, I think, removed a lot of the stress for students. They were able to have conversations about the things we were doing. So it was both an assessment, a way to present the learning, and a way for them to keep engaging in discourse, which again, I think is so important. And I think as a simple structure, the mental map idea can be a powerful one. So I wanted to make sure I shared that one, and it's a form of data for folks where that's important.
All right.
Okay, we're gonna share a video that it sort of combines all of these elements we've been talking about: experiential learning, building in community partner, and the community partner is so strong in this sense. And then having students share in an authentic way. It's about a 2-minute video that we'll watch. I think it's an older project, probably from like 2012 at High Tech High, and definitely one that's high level, but I think, fantastic in terms of providing some inspiration, hopefully. Oh, is sound off?
No sound.
No.
Okay.
And that's cool. We again, we'll send these out and folks can look at it there. So to summarize, the learning grounded in experiences, in shared experiences, I think is where we need to be going as educators. In particular with tools like OpenAI coming in, a reflection about a shared experience isn't something that thing can do. So grounding the learning in that, I think, brings more engagement for young people and for the teachers as well. Community partnerships are super important in like helping teachers build out their skill set and creating authentic experiences for everybody in a learning space. And then sharing learning publicly is transformative for everybody in the space. I think as well, starting small and just being consistent with like, I'm trying this thing for the next few months. I'm going to reflect on that, and then I'm going to try the next thing, much like we ask of students in a PBL space, is important for teachers and admin. And I think
All right.
Things up.
That leaves us at the end. So we put our contact information up there. If you're interested in reaching out, if we have any questions, we have a little bit of time for questions.
So fellas, I am going to say that, first of all, thank you for having the Dream Team duo, because you all answered questions in the chat as we went. So I don't really have to do that. I'm hoping people had an opportunity to read some of those. I'm just gonna put my screen back up with your pictures up on there, but you guys did a wonderful job of doing that. One of the things that I thought about as we watched this was this theme around starting small. Like, some people want to go out the gate big, but you got to start somewhere, and start small is something that you really can manage when you're looking at what those project-based learning opportunities are. But a couple of things that stood out for me was around early when you talked about teacher passion and student voice. But when you have that teacher passion, how much that makes a difference. So thank you for talking about that. Oftentimes we talk about student voice, but we forget the teacher passion part, because when it's a teacher passion, they put so much more into it and want the kids to be successful. And then this idea around cultivating community partners. Our partners are so valuable. We can't do this work alone. And so as you lift up your work, how do you engage the community? And then later you tied it into the student and family engagement part, right? That is monumental when you think about, yes, student engagement, but how much bigger is it when you engage our families in this process? So thank you so much. I don't think I see any additional questions. Let me look one more time.
I think there are a few about funding, it sounds like.
Okay, let me scroll, because I'm listening, so I don't. So if you see the funding question, have at it, answer it. This is all about you, my friend.
I think, in terms of funding, like I said, in the community partnerships, we haven't really leaned heavily on asking for, amounts of money for funding from our community partners, but typically a lot of our community pieces will help our business partners will donate money. I also, we've done some work around that piece comes from the kids. The kids can work, call, the kids can write a professional email. You can teach those skills. We're teaching the communication skills that what we want for our intended outcomes. So I think when you look at pieces like that, we've looked at community partnerships, your local PTAs or your parent teacher associations or PTOs, whatever you have in your area. That's been a big piece for us. We've also, I know at our district level, we have set aside some funds out of our leadership and learning budget in order we run what's called an e-lab, where we have students actually pitch ideas to us. So they do all of the research, and they're pitching ideas of projects and funding for their classrooms. And so that's been a piece for us as well. And those have kind of been our major funding sources.
And then I saw this other question. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, from a teacher lens, it is challenging. A community partner donated a telescope that kind of launched work. And once the thing is once you get going with a particular type of work and folks see you're doing it, then other funding sources kind of materialize. So that initial telescope allowed us to go to the parent association and be like, we need a camera, because then we were able to produce images that we shared out, that students were sharing out, and then funders saw that and were like, hey, we want to help you guys more. And that was actually how this organization, Blue Dot Education, even got off the ground, was that initial donation of the telescope and then the Parent Association buying a camera. Because the initial thing where you can start the work is so important. I think as well, starting small is super important, and having leadership that is willing to say, I'm going to carve out a small piece of budget so that we can get a group rolling on this. Because without that, it's really, really difficult. And, you know, going into the coaching spaces, that's one of the first things I ask administrators when they're like, you know, we want you guys to come in and coach teachers to do projects. It's like, well, is there a budget for them to do projects? And even a small amount, a few $100s to get them running, because otherwise it can just be challenging for the thing to grow. And so it is tough, but I think the school has to value it enough where they're willing to put some funds behind it. And then there was a question about the best piece of advice we both have received on PBL implementation. Adam, you want to?
I think probably the best piece of advice that I've received is you just got to go for it. You know, there's sometimes we get this nervous energy as teachers of like, I don't know what this is going to look like, and it's going to feel awkward. And, but that sometimes creates false starts for us. So if you just go for it and just do it, and then you're learning along the way. So taking all of those moments with your students to be able to reflect and improve on your own teaching practice, because this, like we opened up, we said, this is, you know, this is going to take some energy, but to see on the back end the way that kids talk about their learning, and like Brian showed that picture of that absolutely packed cafeteria space that is focused on student learning, like that's enough usually to fuel you through to that next piece.
Yeah, I would say that's what Tracy said. Start small. You got to start small with it and realize that when you, because it's very personal. That's why I think of that, the teacher on their first exhibition where they made this book, and he was probably as nervous, more nervous than the students, because he wants the thing to turn out well. That feeling is going to be there. And there's a great video from Ira Glass, who's producer of This American Life, where he talks about the creative process. And he talks about the fact that when you first start doing something creative, it's never going to turn out how you want it to be. And that's so applicable to teaching and doing projects. The first time you roll through a thing, it will not be the way that you imagine it, which you might be seeing some model out there that's done by a professional. And you're like, I want students to do something like this. The first time through, it won't go that way. It just won't, and that's fine. And that's that whole process of iteration that we want to ask students to go through. The teachers have to be willing to go through it as well and be like, okay, this is where we got this time. The next time I run that, I'm going to build on what we did there, and it's going to be a little bit better and a little bit better. And after a few times of running it, you'll look back and have taken, you know, incremental small amounts of improvement, but the aggregate of improvement will be huge, and you'll be surprised by it. And I think that's important. Don't get discouraged. Start small and build on what you learned from semester to semester.
Well, Adam and Brian, thank you for being here today. It's another powerful session full of plenty of nuggets for us to take back and implement. We appreciate all the good work you're doing. And you did a great job following Joe. Yay, 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 keeping this thing on fire for us as we close out with our last speaker. So thank you so much for being here.